This is the game Gurgenıdze Tal, played in the Soviet Union in the 24th game of the Soviet Championship in 1957. d4, knight f6, c4, c5, d5, e6. Recall the Benko gambit was b5 here. Now Tal plays e6. The Benoni is a risky, dynamic opening with black that I actually played for a number of years myself. When I was 11 years old, I drew a game against the world champion, Garry Kasparov, in a simul in this variation. Knight c3, ed5, cd5, d6. Knight f3, g6, e4, taking the center, bishop g7. So we see black has this excellent fianchettoed bishop again. Bishop e2, castle the king to safety, castles. Tal played rook e8, pressuring that e4 pawn, knight d2. So you see white has a good central pawn structure, and in exchange, black has the potential for queenside expansion that will ultimately undermine the center. Also, black's dark square bishop is potentially really strong. If you compare this opening to the Benko structure, black hasn't lost a pawn, but the b-file closed, and he has more dark square weaknesses to worry about. A typical trade-off. Knight a6. This move might look strange at first, but a central idea for black is to play b5. This kind of expansion is very good because after b4, kicking out this knight, the e-pawn would come under attack. So expanding on the flank is often a very good way to undermine an opponent's central control. Knight a6 is with the idea of knight c7, which would be preparing for that b5 advance. That's his idea. Rook e1. You may think when you see this position that it would be good for white to take on a6, bishop takes a6. Do you agree with this or no? Here white played a4, a good move typical of the Benoni, stopping b5. Now, if your idea is to play a6 and b5, let me give you two options. One is to play a6, and one is to play b6. Which do you prefer? Well, clearly a6 seems more direct, a6 with the idea of b5. The problem with this is that white can play a really strong move, a5. And this really locks down all of black's potential play. You see, b5 can never happen because a takes b6 en passant. If you're at all unclear on the rules of en passant, take a look at the first part of my introductory course. I describe it very clearly there. In this situation, black can never play b5 because the white pawn on a5 stops it. A takes b6 is always possible. So in fact, by black playing a6, it gives white the option of a5, which freezes black's queenside counterplay. So Tal played b6, which might seem a little bit slower. His idea here, of course, is later he can play a6, and now a5 wouldn't be possible because b5 can happen. No problem. So often in this kind of variation, you have to play b6 before playing a6 if your opponent has a blockading idea like a5. This is a good structural lesson to learn. b6, queen c2. Now most chess players in this position with black, even if they're very strong, would continue with their plan and play a6. Maybe next would be rook b8, followed by b5. But here Tal feels, with his incredible intuition, that his opponent has left some critical space behind. Instead of going on with the automatic plan of a6, he seizes out on the opportunity and starts jumping towards the king side. He plays the move knight g4. This is a vintage Tal decision. It's a move taking advantage of a tiny little imperfection possibly in the opponent's game, and beginning a wild kingside attack. Here, white played h3. From this moment on, I want you to put yourself in Tal's shoes. Pretend you're playing black here. White made the move queen c2, which gave up control of the g4 square. Tal played knight g4. Now, that square is guarded by the dark square bishop, so if white takes, bishop takes g4, then after bishop takes g4, black has the two bishops, which are going to be very important in an open game. So after knight g4, white thought that black was just planning knight e5, just maneuvering, for example, into the center. So he played h3. A deadly dare to give a guy like Tal. Now, your move. Black to play. What should you do? A deadly dare to give a guy like Tal. Now, your move. Black to play. What should you do? Excellent. So, knight takes f2. Excellent. So if you look at this position, logically, put together the feeling of the game. White played the move queen c2, moving away from kingside control. White then played the move h3. So the white queen gave up control of the g4 square, and also the white queen left behind the defense of the rook on e1. That's the kind of thing which should always just trigger in your mind a little bit. Whenever your opponent makes a move, what has he left behind? What has she left behind? What is hanging that wasn't hanging before? The rook on e1 might seem to be a piece so deeply embedded in white's camp that it doesn't need to be defended, but all these little things can matter. Then after knight g4, h3 was played, so the dark squares have been weakened. So in the last two moves, white has created a possibility for attack which wasn't there before. So now a guy like Tal will look at that and leap all over it. He played the incredibly aggressive sacrifice, knight takes f2. White took back, king takes f2, and now, you're Tal once again. Black to play. What's your best move? Now he's covering up, then he can bring his king back to g1. Suddenly white would be up a piece and safe. We can't lose time here. In this kind of situation, when we sacrifice material, we have to keep on coming. Black to move. Queen h4 check. Excellent. And now we see white's position starting to teeter. If he goes back to g1, the normal, safe king position, what would black play? Exactly. Queen takes e1 because the rook is hanging, the queen is no longer defending it, and black is up material, attacking, an easy win. So after queen h4 check, white has two options, king f1 or g3. g3 loses very quickly. But let's look at it. Black to play, you're Tal once again. What do you do? Okay, you've done a good job noticing the space left behind. After g3, the pawn is no longer defending the h3 pawn. True. But when you're attacking in this kind of position, you want to play the best move. Be unrelenting. Here you can bring one more piece into the attack. Look for checks. Great, bishop d4 check. Now white plays king g2. If you were to play king f3, you can just play queen h5 check. And next move, after king g2, it would be the same thing. So here, white plays king g2. What now? Queen takes h3 check. Excellent. Excellent. The white king has to come up to f3. Now what? In general, a good way to cap off the win in this type of position is to keep on driving the enemy king in your direction. In other words, force him further and further away from his defenders and towards your attackers. So in this position, we want to bring the white king towards us. Black to play. What do you do? Bishop g4 check. Okay, excellent. So the black queen guards the g2 square. The black bishop guards the e3 and f2 squares. So white has to come up to f4. Good. Now the next step. In this kind of position, there's never a problem sacrificing material. You don't want to move your bishop on d4 because it would give up the e3 square. Move your bishop on g4, it would give up the f3 square. So now can you pull black further, deeper into your camp? Look for a pawn sacrifice. g5 check. Excellent. King takes g5, the only move. And now, check again. Bring the king deeper. Think about this position logically. The bishop on d4 was guarding e3. Now we've brought the king up to the g5 square. And you don't have to calculate all the way out to mate necessarily when you're calculating this kind of variation. All you have to do is think step by step by step. Bring the king deeper, force him further away from his defenders, bring him closer towards my attackers. If you think that way, you'll find the mate. It'll come. Here, the best move is bishop to e3 check, forcing the white king to f6, a completely ridiculous square. Move by move by move, we've checked, forced the white king into our camp, and now you have mate in one. Take your time. Don't move until you see it. Excellent. Queen h6 checkmate. The king is stranded, alone, nowhere to go. So you see, g3 doesn't work in the defense. Bishop d4 check, and that whole variation that followed. So here white saw that. He played the move king f1. We've seen the king g1, hangs the rook on e1. King f1. Now, continue your attack. Don't expect it to be too easy. Black to move. Again, put together the critical factors. The dark squares have been weakened. Try to knife into the dark squares. Threaten checkmate. Here black played bishop d4. Another excellent Tal move. You see the queen slicing this way, the bishop slicing this way. You see black's threat, of course. Black to move. What would you do? Exactly. Checkmate. That was Tal's threat. So here white has only one way to defend the f2 square. Do you see it? Imagine you're defending this position. White to play. What would you do? Right. He played knight d1, defending the f2 square. Now you're Tal once again. Black to play. What do you do? Fantastic. Great attacking instincts. Really good job. Queen takes h3, brings the queen into the game. Here comes another vintage Tal move. Queen takes h3. The idea, of course, is that after g takes h3, here Tal has checkmate in one move. Do you see it? Of course, bishop takes h3. A beautiful position. Black has sacrificed his queen. The dark square bishop slices this way. The light square bishop checks, cuts off the g2 square. It's checkmate. So after queen takes h3, clearly white can't take that. The reason this is better than bishop takes h3 is because now the queen is poised to jump into the h1 square or the h2 square, continuing the attack, while the bishop on h3 is blocking off the queen a little bit. After queen h3, white tried to cover up a little bit. Bishop f3. He's reinforcing the defense of the g2 square, and also he's opening up the e2 square for the king. This kind of defensive resources will always be found by a strong player, and you have to be prepared for it. Bishop f3, holds e4, holds g2, opens up e2 for the king. Black to play. Once again, you're Tal here. What's your best move? Once again, you're Tal here. What's your best move? Queen h2 is the best move. Now, queen g1 check can come whenever you want it to. In this situation, white is up a piece. Black has an excellent attack. There are all sorts of elements happening in this position. Black can sacrifice on d5, and if white takes, then suddenly the e2 square is covered. Black can play moves like f5, opening up the center. Black can play moves like bishop a6 check, coming at him from the other angle. Black can play moves like bishop h3, shooting into the king side. If you want to weaken the defense of the g2 pawn, black can maybe make a move like bishop to g4, sacrificing a bishop to open up a variation like bishop takes g4, queen g1 check, king e2, queen takes g2, forking the king and bishop. All of this kind of thing is in the air. Don't forget the old rule. Often the threat is stronger than the execution. The threat of queen h1 or queen g1 is incredibly powerful because every move of white has to deal with that reality. The move queen h1 here would have been weaker because it's forced. White can jump out of the way, and here the tactics just don't work for black. The threat is stronger than the execution. Queen h2 maintains a huge amount of pressure, tension over white's head. White to move. He played knight e3, a good defensive try. Again, when you're defending this kind of position with white, sometimes you have to just cover up. Put as many pieces in front of the attacking pieces as possible, blocking things. Here, knight e3 blocks the black bishop, so queen g1 check is no longer possible. On the other hand, the knight on e3 is a target now. It's only defended by the rook on e1. If this e-pawn were gone, black could win that piece. So now, build the pressure on white's game. Black to move. You're tall. Continue your attack. A really important principle to keep in mind in this kind of situation is when the opponent's king is stuck in the middle, open up the center. Open up the center. Open up the lines of attack. Here, think about that principle. How can you bust open the center? f5, exactly. Fantastic move. It's also a patient move. You see, many players, when they sacrifice a piece, they get nervous. They feel like they have to prove everything right away. Win by force, checkmate, calculate things out, win back the material, because they're not able to sit with the reality of being down in material. But here, Tal is such a vintage, beautiful attacker. He understands. He has compensation for the material. He has a building attack, and he has no problem increasing the tension, sitting with it, making white suffer. Here, white played knight dc4. A good developmental move. He's got to reinforce the e3 knight, protecting it again. The bishop on c1 is now jumping into the defense. He's also blocking off this long diagonal here, which could help out in the defense. It's a good move. But once again, think about the question, what has my opponent left behind? What is the space left behind? Knight on d2 had an eye on e4. After knight c4, that square is less defended. Tal took advantage of that. F takes e4, opening up the center. And after the forced bishop takes e4, now the f file is open onto that king. Black can check whenever he wants to. Now, Tal's move once again. And it's your move. Black to play. These principles function over and over and over. You have the check, rook f8 check. You know that. Don't rush it. The threat is stronger than the execution. If you play rook f8, then after bishop f3, you've moved your rook off of the e-file. Maybe it was better there. That's not the best move. Here you can increase the pressure on white's position by bringing another piece into the game. Bishop a6. Excellent. This knight on c4 now is pinned. It can't move anywhere. The knight on e3, which is defending it, is also under pressure from the dark square bishop. Now it's time to continue the build. Immediate attacks don't work, but do you see a way to paralyze black's defenders? Remember how I told you that often in chess the threat is stronger than the execution? Well, this position is the perfect example. Tal has many tactical options, but at the moment, none of them win by force. Gurgenıdze is holding on by a thread, but any move he makes might open up the winning possibility. The thing to do in this position is increase the pressure. Black to move. Bring another piece into the game. The white queen on c2 is an overloaded piece. It's guarding both c4 and e4. So if you take away the defender of the one square, the other one will go. So for example, if bishop takes e3, bishop takes c4, if the queen has to move away, he'll lose control of the other one. This dynamic is very delicate. White's position is teetering right on the edge. Here he recognized that, the overloaded piece, and played bishop to f3. Now the queen is only guarding the c4 square. Here, once again, you might have the instinct that you should take something. Take the knight on c4, take the knight on e3. No, increase the pressure on your opponent's position. Another positional move. One more principle I want you to have in mind. Whenever you have a pin in the position, for example, in this situation, the knight on c4 is pinned to the white king, that tension is working in your direction. Your piece has tension on his piece. His piece doesn't have tension back onto your piece, and his piece is moved. In general, unless there's a specific tactic that's winning material for you, you don't ever want to take this now, because the potential energy in the position is much better than the kinetic energy. In other words, what you have hovering in the air here for the future is much more powerful than what can immediately be created by bishop takes c4. Whenever one of your pieces has tension on one of his pieces, then you're in control of all the tactics. Anytime, any moment, in any combination, you have the option of taking that, and your opponent has to constantly figure that into his calculations. So don't remove that tension. Maintain it. There's one piece left that's not doing anything in the attack. This one, the rook on a8. This knight on c7 actually is doing something because in all the tactics, he's eyeing the d5 square. The rook on a8 needs to be brought into the game. How can that happen? That's a good move. That's the right idea, but it's not the best move. Here you can maximize both of your rooks. The rook on a8 needs to be brought into the game. How can that happen? A very powerful move, rook e5. Of course, tactically this works because the knight on c4 is pinned to the king. He can't play knight takes e5 because the bishop is attacking that f1 square. So rook e5 has a number of ideas. For one thing, he's planning rook a to e8, doubling up on the e-file, which is going to be deadly. The other option will be rook to f8. If that's the best move, rook f8 hits the f3 square. It depends what white plays. Maybe that'll be the move. The third option, which is available because of the move rook e5 as opposed to rook e7, is that after rook e5, black can play rook g5 or rook h5 if he wants to. This idea is hovering in the position. The rook on the g5 square puts extra pressure on g2. If this bishop somehow moves, then rook to h5 might help the penetration to the back rank. You never know. In this kind of situation, you want to maximize the potential. Give your opponent as many things to worry about as possible. Also, the rook on e5 eyes that d5 square one more time. Rook e5 is a fantastic move. Here, Gurgenıdze realized that the most likely thing for Tal to do would be rook a to e8, piling up on that e3 square once again. So he defended rook a3. Now, you're Tal. Once again, how do you most effectively build the tension, build the pressure on your opponent's position? Rook a to e8. Excellent. Now the tactics are about to get really bad for white. Gurgenıdze played bishop to d2. This is a good move. Bring one more defender into the game. Also, this knight on e3 was pinned to the e1 square because of the doubled rooks. If the knight moves somewhere, then after rook takes e1, it's checkmate because the rook on e8 is guarding that square. So by playing bishop d2, Gurgenıdze was defending that e1 square one more time. So now if you look at it, every single one of the white pieces is defending. Virtually every single one of the black pieces is attacking. The bishop on d4 is putting immense pressure on everything. The black queen on h2 can shoot to h1 whenever he wants to. This is always in the game. It doesn't win tactically yet, so there's no reason to do it. The threat is stronger than the execution. These two rooks are doubled up on the e-file. Fantastic. This bishop on a6 is slicing into the game, paralyzing the knight on c4, and prepared at any moment, when it's right, to take on c4. Okay, there's one piece which is not actively in the game. Your instinct should be, here, you've built the pressure as much as possible. Everything in white's position is hanging by a thread. Now, your instinct is, what piece of mine isn't playing? What piece of mine hasn't done it yet? Black to move, work out the tactics, take your time here. What do you think Tal did? Here white realized he was in huge trouble, and he started to run away with the king. All of his pieces are pinned down, they're all defending in their best possible position. The only thing to do now was for white to try to run his king away. King e2 to d1, to c1, to b1. If he can get away, then maybe he can survive. He played the move king to e2. Now, you're Tal. This is the moment where you've built up the tension enough, all the tactics in the air are going to work out for you. Your move. What do you play? Now, you're Tal. This is the moment where you've built up the tension enough, all the tactics in the air are going to work out for you. Your move. What do you play? Very often when you've built up the tension on your opponent's game up to this point, the tactics become very straightforward. Here, white just can't hang on to everything. Tal played bishop takes e3. The knight on e3 is pinned. If bishop takes e3, that bishop on e3 would be pinned. Black to move, you have checkmate in one move here. What do you do? Black to move, you have checkmate in one move here. What do you do? Queen takes g2, mate, exactly. The rook on d5 cuts off that rank. The rook on e8 pins the bishop, so bishop f2 is impossible. White's under check. It's all over. Mate. So after bishop takes e3, the only move is rook takes e3. Now, you're Tal once again. Black to play. Continue your attack. The knight on c4, of course, can't really move here because it's pinned to the king. I told you that you don't want to remove that kind of tension when you have a pinned piece like this under tension by one of your pieces. But here the tactics work out right. If queen takes c4, do you see what he had in mind? Queen takes g2 check, king d1, and now checkmate in one move. You see it? You see it? Exactly. Queen takes d2 checkmate. After bishop takes c4 check, white had had enough, and he resigned. He saw that after queen takes c4, queen g2 would be mate, and after king d1, let's just finish off this game with black. Tal's move, what would you do? And after king d1, let's just finish off this game with black. Tal's move, what would you do? Here actually, a build in pressure is enough to win the game. Rook takes e3, can't take with the bishop because of the pin, and then after rook takes e3, if you make a move like queen g1 check, rook e1, and then here once more, a quiet move can actually win the game. Queen f2 maintains the pressure. The bishop can't move. The queen can't move because it's defending the bishop on d2, which is mate if queen takes c4. Black can play queen takes d2 checkmate. King c1 here would have to be played. And now, do you see the point for black? This is why white resigned. Tal would play one more great move, bishop to b3. Do you see the idea? After queen takes b3, what would black play? Exactly, queen takes d2 check, and after the king moves, queen takes e1, wins the rook. So after bishop b3, there's only one square for the white queen to go to defend that bishop on d2, queen c3, and now I'll let you find Tal's last move. Black to play here. You have mate in 2. Don't move until you see it. Excellent. Queen takes e1, bishop takes e1, And now, cap it off, checkmate. Rook d1, mate. Wonderful job. This was an absolutely beautiful game, in which the whole attack was guided by positional principles. The truth is that virtually all attacks that succeed against strong players have this type of principled core, even if that core is difficult to perceive by the untrained eye. So if you're a natural attacker, and you want to learn about positional chess, you can do so by the careful study of the positional elements of the great attackers, like Tal. Also, if you think about this game carefully, it's quite inspiring. Tal's brilliance was from one perspective completely unique. On the other hand, many of his most astonishing attacks can be understood with the help of the chess principles discussed in this academy. Trust me, if you internalize a solid principled foundation, you'll have the arsenal you need for high-level chess. All that's left is to become very skilled in harmonizing, coordinating the principles. And that just takes practice. This game was played in Riga,